Hello everybody, welcome to the third module of Scientific Foundations of Stress. Today we shall discuss about the types of stress and effect of stress on behavior. But before we do that, we shall get into, we'll do a basic review of what we have learned so far. So primarily talking about stress, we need to remember a few points. Number one, we all experience stress at times. Stress is a feeling of being bound up, being tightened and wound up tight, tensed, worried. Sometimes it helps us to complete a task and also perform well. But sometimes when the stress is very high, it actually overweighs upon us and has its adverse effects as well. Primarily, it interferes with the ability to carry on with our normal life. Now today, as I mentioned, we shall be talking about the different types of stress. They are acute stress, episodic acute stress and chronic stress. Now what is acute stress? Acute stress is actually the most common form of stress. All of us undergo acute stress from time to time. Now this is primarily the way we deal with a situation at hand. So it is as per the demands and pressures of the current situation, or something related to the recent past, or a stressor that we are apprehending in the recent future. So it could be something like that lasts for a very brief short period of time and is unspecific to the demands of a situation, like an exam that I am preparing for, or say it could be for students it could be preparing for the placement season, or appearing for the GRE exams, and also it could be for a surgeon, it could be carrying out a surgery. It is the body's immediate response to a new challenge, event or demand, and it, as you can understand, it triggers a fight or flight response. Now these symptoms are generally realized by every individual who's undergoing acute stress. So it's something like most people blurt out as, I am very stressed, I am very tensed about, and they mention a particular event. So they know that this is the event that is causing the stress, or that is bringing about the changes in the physiological as well as psychological makeup of the individual to deal effectively with the situation. So is this stress good or bad? We will see a few acute stresses are failing an exam, an interview, a presentation or a submission that's around the corner. Most of my students talk about this form of stress. Recent relationship breakup, this is also something that I hear from students. Losing a job, accident, deadline that needs to be met soon, car breakdown, time management despite several constraints, and a sudden illness of a close one. Now all these situations require immediate response. So the individual also realizes that because of these immediate response urging situations, there is a change in the body's mechanism. So do you think that acute stress can be exciting, or it has its positive effects as well? We've spoken about completing a task and doing a job well, performing well. So we'll just see an example of how exhilarating acute stress can be. This is about an individual who has performed this feat. This is a skydiver who has performed the feat of jumping without a parachute from 25,000 feet high from a helicopter, from a flight plane, and he has landed on the ground, that's on a tarpaulin that's only 40 by 40 feet. Now this is a record. He has set a record for himself. The earlier one was jumping from 18,000 feet. Now he has done this feat from 25,000 feet, and this is a very recent, this has been very recently done on the 30th of July 2016. You can go through the YouTube version of this. This gentleman's name is Luke Aikins. Look at him doing the flips on air. He doesn't have a protective suit or a parachute to stop the fall. He has 4 people assisting him. They are just there with him, who will have their parachutes open very soon. Look at the speed with which they are going down.
Shoots, and that means Luke is all alone for the rest of the way. At 6,000 feet, he'll get another beep in his helmet.
Look at him doing the flips. Now the others are opening up their parachute, so they are very close to the ground, and look at the speed.
On the ground looking up, they have a visual on him right now.
There he goes. So how did you feel while watching this video? Were you feeling excited like Luke? Were you feeling something going down your body, feeling the excitement of going through this feat yourself? What do you think Luke was going through when he was doing this act, or what was going on in his mind just before the act? His body was equally stressed about dealing with this, but this stress actually helped him to focus. He has, when you listen to his interview, you will realize how he speaks about maintaining that maintaining his target, identifying the pointers on the target so that he could land himself on the tarpaulin. Now this is the acute stress and its positive factors of actually helping him to focus on the task and do it better. But think about this. What if Luke had carried out this feat from morning till the end of the day, several times a day? Do you think his brain would be responding as acutely as the very first time? Do you think his body would be able to deal with so much of heightened arousal for a long time? What would happen to his body? Now, thrills are good, and these are exhilarating for short periods of time, but if it is continued for a longer span, then it becomes tiring and draining, and it brings about a lot of emotional as well as physiological fatigues. Now these are some of the effects of prolonged acute stress. So as I was mentioning, that if acute stress carries on for a long time, then it brings about some adverse effects. One of them being the emotional distress, where the individual displays a lot of anger, irritability, many times anxiety, and also depressive features during a stressful situation, or say after a stressful situation. Some of the muscular fatigues, because of the heightened arousal, the tension within the muscles, it creates a lot of muscular fatigue as well, and we get to see muscle tension, strains, ligament tear, backaches and tension headaches. Now, backaches and tendons and ligaments tear are a very common feature with sports stars. So, if they carry on with an acute stressful situation for a long time, then it actually wears the muscles and it depletes the energy and brings about tendon and ligament tear. Now, we are talking about tension headache over here. What is a tension headache and how would you differentiate it from other headaches? Now, tension headache is actually like a band tied up around your forehead and up your back. So, it's something like that's holding the tightened band wound over your head circumference. So, the pain starts from the back of the head. So, even the back muscles of the neck, they are, because of the tightening of the muscles, there is pain in these areas, and then it shifts to throughout the head like this. And many times you will see that the individual is also complaining of pain in the earlobes and at the back of the earlobes. Now, this is a little different from migraine headaches. In migraine headaches, generally the headache starts from one part of the head and it gradually moves to the other part, and it covers, generally it goes like this. And migraine headaches may have several causes, but one of the causes is stress. Now, in migraine headaches, it is also accompanied by nausea and a feeling of an adverse reaction towards sound and light. So, the individual gets more disturbed by sound and light stimulus. Now, this so if next time if you have a headache and you see that this is actually tightened, you have a tightening feeling around your head, then you have to understand that there must be a stressor around that's actually making you feel this headache. Most of the times, the best part is that you can actually point out the stressor. I was mentioning this earlier, that individuals can understand what an acute stressor is, and if they deal with that situation, then they can actually move on with their lives normally. Now, prolonged acute stress also brings about stomach and muscle heart problems. So, we see heartburn, acid formation in the stomach, diarrhea, indigestion, flatulence, constipation, and irritable bowel syndrome. Irritable bowel syndrome is one of the psychosomatic disorders that we shall speak about in the disease section, that is caused due to stress. But you have, think about what we studied earlier about the acid secretions increasing in the body during a stressful situation, and how that is affecting the acid formation in the stomach, and that causes a lot of stomach problems. Now, transient over arousal, that is this heightened arousal, often causes increase in blood pressure, increase in heartbeat, sweaty palms, palpitations, dizziness, headaches, cold sweats, and shortness of breath, etc. Now, we must remember that acute stress can crop up in any individual's life. The best part is it is treatable and manageable. Now, next we come into episodic acute stress. As the term episodic acute stress suggests, it happens to an individual, that is, acute stress happens to an individual frequently, and when that does, it is known as episodic acute stress. One of the key features of episodic acute stress is that the personality of an individual is a very important factor. So, when we are talking about worriers or worrywarts who get worried about everything, it could be, we often speak of an individual like who gets tensed a lot. It's today he's tensed about exams, tomorrow it's relationship, third day it's something else. So, that's the way we talk about a worrier. So, a worrier worries about everything, and say for every situation there is an increased arousal. So, there is a heightened arousal, and then there is a pause, and then there is another situation. So, a worrier actually looks for situations to get worried. and these individuals have their bodies display prolonged effects of acute stress, and as you can well understand, we have negative health effects as well. Some of the symptoms of extended over arousal are persistent tension headaches, migraines, hypertension, chest pain, and heart disease. See, we have spoken about chest pain and headaches in acute stress section, but since that's for a discrete period of time, that can be dealt with. But when we are talking about episodic acute stress, where it is happening in spurts, there the individual, we do come across migraines and heart disease. So whenever you come across an individual, even if you are having a migraine, you will have to understand that a stressor could actually exacerbate these symptoms. As I've mentioned earlier, migraines may have several other causes, but one of them is the stressor. The strange part of these warriors are that they don't realize that it is the way they deal with things in their life are actually causing them more stress. So generally they blame it to others, or they blame it to external events. So there is a resistance to change, and they do not change their lifestyle or their interactive patterns to bring about a betterment or the improvement of the stressful situation. Most of the times these individuals require long-term treatment. Now coming to chronic stress. Chronic stress is something that an individual is going through for a long period of time. So it could be for years, which is actually draining away the energy of an individual. Say, think about an individual who is going through a very poor dysfunctional family life since childhood, and over the period of years he or she has seen the family fights, family arguments, and maybe mother is clinically depressed, father is alcoholic, and there's a lot of beating and yelling and abusing in the house. And if there are other stresses like financial crisis or academic poor performance, then these all add up to increase the stress of the individual. And if an individual is going through such a situation for several years, say think about a child growing up in this situation for years together, what do you think a person's what would be the bodily responses, and what would be the belief system? Most of the times chronic stress brings about a lot of changes in the way an individual thinks. So it could bring about changes like, there's nothing to be done, life is like this, and I'll have to accept what comes my way. So this is a form of learned helplessness. The term learned helplessness was coined by Martin Seligman, and he spoke about individuals. He actually conducted the experiment on rats, and he showed that if a rat is given a shock, mild shock, and after that when he is trying to perform an act to get food pellets, it will stop doing that act because of the punishment. But even after that shock is removed, so that is the punishment is removed, the rat will still not try and go and do it, and he termed this as learned helplessness, and he said that this is actually seen also in human beings. So even if a person is going through a chronic negative adverse life event or several life events over 8 years together, chronic stress over years together, and he starts believing that there is no change that I can bring about to the situation, then even when he can actually bring about a change, he will not try, because he has started believing that there is nothing to be done. Now these situations are this sense of learned helplessness may be brought about by warfare, financial crisis, long-term relationship problems, traumatic experiences, unwanted career job, or that an individual is carrying on for a long time, chronic illnesses, dysfunctional family patterns, the one that I was talking of, and definitely traumatic childhood experiences where an individual has, in dysfunctional families, where the individual has internalized this as a part of his life. Now, as you can understand that the effects of chronic stress are most severe than that of acute stress, and here dry mouth, difficulty breathing, pounding heart, stomach ache, chronic headache, these are some of the physical signs, and some of the psychological signs being sudden irritability or snappy behavior, problems in concentrating and focus, difficulty sleeping, narrowed down perception, and frequent feelings of exhaustion and fatigue. Some of the effects of chronic stress being violence, sudden violence and aggression, self-harm, and suicide. Also a lot of parasuicidal behavior where an individual keeps slashing his wrist or harming himself in some way. Clinical depression, an individual withdraws himself from society, isolates oneself. PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, we will talk about this in detail. I'll just mention this. It is after a trauma, the stresses that keep coming back as images to an individual. Heart attack, stroke, and cancer. Now, these are some of the illnesses that have been related to chronic stress. And as you can understand, the physiological and the psychological resources of an individual, when depleted through constant attrition over time, actually brings about these illnesses. So many times these are psychophysiological illnesses that will drain away the energy. So think about an individual who is, we'll go back to Hans Selye, where when an individual is coming across a stressor, he tries to resist it. But if that stressor is continuing for a long period of time, then the strength of resistance gradually reduces and the individual's energy to resist is being depleted. So the physiological and the psychological resources are being depleted over time, and the body gives in, the body and mind both gives in to exhaustion. Now, to understand the effect of stress on performance, we'll talk about appetite first, and we see that when an individual is in a stressful situation, they often speak about losing their appetite. So, I don't feel like eating. You have an exam, you need to eat before you go for the exam. No, I don't feel like eating. I can't, I think I'll vomit, I'll throw up, I can't eat anything. Now, these are some of the things that we often come across when people are stressed. What actually is happening is, there is a physiological reason behind this. Digestion is a parasympathetic activity. So, the brain's autonomic nervous system looks after the arousal of the bodily arousal and maintaining homeostasis. So there, the brain's when the autonomic nervous system has two parts. So one is the sympathetic activation system, and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system starts functioning primarily during a stressful situation, that is during a fight or flight response. What is happening is the body is preparing itself to resist to meet the stressor and deal with it. So either by facing it or by fleeing from the situation. So in either ways, the body has to be prepared. We can't just get up from sleep and face man with an arm in his hand trying to harm me. So on the other hand, digestion is a parasympathetic activity. So what happens is, during a stressor, the sympathetic nervous system is activated and the digestive system is suppressed. So you don't feel an appetite. Similarly, on the stress also has an effect on the sexual activity. In this case, the sexual arousal and the reproduction rates, this is reduced due to chronic stress. Also, if the acute stressor is very high. the intensity of the stressor is very high. And what happens is it precludes the testosterone release in the males and reduces concentration of estrogen in females. Effects of stress on cognition. We have spoken about the belief system, where we spoke about learned helplessness. We also see that stress affects cognition and memory. During a stressful situation, we see that if there is a less amount of stress, we have actually seen for the positive effects where the individual can focus. But if there is prolonged stress, then the focus of attention cannot be maintained, and also the long-term stress brings about a negative adverse effect on the memory, on the working memory of an individual. How does it affect growth? So, we have spoken about the appetite being reduced during a stressful situation, but again, digestive enzymes are release of various digestive enzymes are affected, and nutrients are not absorbed. So, this causes nutritional deficits during a stressful situation, and growth is affected. You will see that in conditions where warfare has been affecting society in places where warfare has affected society for a long time, the nutritional effects on the children are, you will see that their growth is affected. One of the primary reasons is because of the depletion of nutrients from the body. It is not always because of poverty, but it is also because of the stressor of actually going through the warfare that brings about the effect in growth changes. Several times in adults, the calcium that the body is required to absorb for the integration of the bone is harmed, is affected during a stressful situation, and there is a disintegration of bone due to the lack of use of calcium in the body. So, to summarize, today we have spoken about the different types of stress, that is acute stress, episodic acute stress and chronic stress, what are the symptoms and how it affects the body, and we have seen the effects of stress on cognition, sexual activity and digestion and growth. Thank you.